There were a lot of blockbuster science fiction movies in the 70s. In fact, that was a decade that saw a lot of firsts. The first Star Wars, the first Star Trek, the first Alien movie, not to mention such blockbusters like Close Encounters of the Third Kind and A Clockwork Orange. But I'm not going to talk about any of those. I want to talk about the lesser-known science fiction films of the 70s, the indie films, the smaller films, the films that weren't so successful for whatever reason, but have stuck with me because I am Daisy Ex Machina, the drag queen detective who investigates all things speculative in science fiction, fantasy, and horror. I picked out 10 films, but I wasn't sure what order to list them, so I decided to go with the tomatometer. The Rotten Tomatoes critical consensus, which is an aggregate score of reviews by critics. The first movie I want to talk about is a real stinker that for some reason I have fond memories of. And that is Damnation Alley, released in 1977, based on a story by Roger Zelazny. It has a 40% rating on the tomatometer and an audience rating even lower, 34%. It has a pretty decent cast: George Peppard, Jan Michael Vincent, Paul Winfield, but for me, as a kid, I was most excited about Jackie Earle Haley, who I had a huge crush on ever since he was in the Bad News Bears. The movie itself is basically a post-apocalyptic road trip in an armored RV. Really, that's the movie. I think there was a plot. I think there was some sort of plot about survivors of a nuclear holocaust trying to find a radio signal that would lead them to the last bastion of humanity. I know for sure that there were giant cockroaches, which really freaked me out. Should you watch it? Probably not. But I have a strange, soft spot for Damnation Alley. Another post-apocalyptic movie is Zardoz, released in 1974. It only got a 50% on the tomatometer and an audience rating of 53%, which kind of means you either love it or hate it. Personally, I love it. It's sort of like if you dropped acid and entered a world that's a cross between The Wizard of Oz and A Clockwork Orange. It's known for being extremely weird. How this movie got made is a story unto itself, but somehow they did manage to snag Sean Connery in the lead role. I love the premise of the movie. A World War event has plunged society into these roving bands of barbarian killers, except for one group who live under a dome and they never die. It's such a great exploration on what immortality means. Since no one can die, the punishment among the immortals is to add years to their lives, physically age them. So criminals are these elderly psychos who can't die. But then there's this other set or subset in their society who are just called the apathetics, who are tired of living, but they can't die, so they just shut down, becoming these comatose zombies. The plot is about one of the barbarians outside of the dome who travels on a giant floating head, which is the god Zardoz, and sneaks into the city of immortals. I have always loved this movie from the first time I saw it, which was probably in the 80s. And this is a movie that sticks with you, at least it did for me. But a huge warning, lots of people absolutely hate it. Probably because it has this psychedelic experimental quality that makes it feel like you need some kind of cipher to understand. You probably know about this next movie. I am talking about Logan's Run, released in 1976. It has a 60% rating on the tomatometer and a 67% audience rating. Basically, when it was released, adults hated this movie, but young people loved it. And believe it or not, I was one of those young people who saw it in the theater and raved about it. I was in middle school at the time, and everyone I know who saw it talked about it. This was a movie, by the way, which made Farrah Fawcett really popular, even though she had this bit part. It also starred Michael York, who was someone else I had a crush on. Is there a pattern? It starts off as kind of a utopia where everyone is young and beautiful, living hedonistic lives in domed cities. Then you start seeing under the surface and realize everyone is getting killed off when they turn 30. Logan is a Sandman, someone who hunts down people who try to run away from their death sentence. But then Logan has to run. Again, it was hugely popular amongst the kids, which prompted CBS to fast-track a Logan's Run TV series, which was really bad. And the series was canceled after one season. In 1971, the first movie based on a Michael Crichton novel was made called The Andromeda Strain. Yes, I'm talking about the Jurassic Park Michael Crichton. It has a 67% rating on the tomatometer and a very respectable audience score of 72%. The movie starred a bunch of no-name actors, at least I don't recognize any of the names, and the whole movie takes place mostly in an underground science laboratory. The plot is a satellite crashes in a small town in New Mexico that carries some sort of extraterrestrial organism that kills almost everyone it comes in contact with. In fact, it turns their blood to dust. Wasn't there a Star Trek episode like that? Anyway, a team of scientists work around the clock trying to figure out how to cure or defeat this illness named the Andromeda Strain. The one scene that really sticks in my mind is when one of the scientists has a form of epilepsy that is triggered by flashing lights. It's a decent sci-fi story, though probably the most tame storyline in terms of science fiction of all the films we're talking about. The next movie shouldn't work, but it does. I'm talking about Rollerball, released in 1975, starring James Caan. It also features John Houseman, the elder statesman actor with a great voice, and he's most famous probably for The Paper Chase. It has a 67% on the tomatometer and a 61% audience rating. It's set in the far, far future of 2018. Corporations rule the world and have replaced countries. To placate the masses, the corporations have invented this blood and circuses solution called Rollerball, which is roller derby meets football meets gladiator matches. One of the top rollerball players is Jonathan E., who becomes disillusioned with the system and begins opposing his corporate masters. As he rises up to be more and more popular with the masses, the corporations feel threatened. There are so many themes and allegories here about consumerism, corporate sponsorship, sports, celebrity. I think it really does stand the test of time. It was remade into a not-so-great version in 2002. Some movies just shouldn't be remade. Leave well enough alone. Everyone has heard of this next movie, I'm sure. The Stepford Wives, released in 1975. It has a 70% rating on the tomatometer and a 65% audience rating. Its main star, Catherine Ross, may not sound familiar, but if you've seen movies in the 70s, you'll probably recognize her. She was Dustin Hoffman's fiancée in The Graduate. Also, if you're of a certain age, you'll recognize Tina Louise in a minor role who played Ginger on Gilligan's Island. Based on the novel of the same name, the story is a social satire of men's fantasies of the perfect wife. Subservient, devoted to housework, beautiful sex pots. In other words, men, or some men at least, don't want a real person as a wife, but rather an unrealistic ideal. The ultimate conclusion to this male fantasy culminates in the town of Stepford, where wives are too perfect, way too perfect, caricatures of June Cleaver. When a new couple moves in, the wife starts getting suspicious and investigates. This is filmed as a sci-fi horror story, and I include it here because even though the term Stepford wife has become an iconic cultural idiom, the movie wasn't a blockbuster. In fact, some feminists called for a boycott of the movie. But isn't the whole point of satire to extrapolate a problem of society to ridiculous conclusions, a la Jonathan Swift's Modest Proposal? I don't really understand why there was such a backlash. The movie was remade into an awful, awful version in 2004. Didn't we just say some movies shouldn't be remade? The next movie will break your heart. Silent Running was released in 1972 and stars Bruce Dern. It has a 71% on the tomatometer and a 66% audience rating. It's set in the far future when plant life has been destroyed on Earth. So these enormous biospheres are created on a space station to preserve plant life. The story is about the botanist who takes care of these biospheres. He's a bit of a misanthrope who loves his plants more than people, and the robots who love him more than their programming. This is not a happy movie. It's kind of depressing, but it makes you think. There are so many shades of gray, it's really hard to see what's right or wrong at the end. Of all the movies covered here, this may be my favorite. And if there's only one movie you watch from this list, I suggest Silent Running. Next is Dark Star, released in 1974. This is John Carpenter's first movie, which started as a student film project. Carpenter would, of course, later go on to become a big name in the horror genre with The Thing and Halloween. Dark Star scored a 77 on the tomatometer and has a 65% audience rating. The movie is about a starship on a mission to scout for planets and destroy planets that are a threat to human life. This movie is absolute nuts. Carpenter described it as Waiting for Godot in space, and there is something of the theater of the absurd about a crew of 5 men basically suffering from cabin fever. The characters in the movie have this stoner mentality, like with The Clerks and movies like that. There's also an alien pet that looks like a giant beach ball, an intelligent bomb that holds discussions of philosophy, a surfer dude, a captain in deep freeze. If you like dry, funny, philosophical stoner comedies, you may want to check out Dark Star. I was actually surprised by the tomatometer rating for the next movie, and that is A Boy and His Dog, released in 1975, based, of course, on the famous novella by Harlan Ellison. It has a 78% tomatometer rating, 78, and a 63% audience rating. This is a very early film of Don Johnson in a starring role. It's called a black comedy, though I never really thought anything about it was comedic. It's set in yet another post-apocalyptic future, this one where the people on the surface fight for survival, kind of like Mad Max. In fact, the creator of Mad Max said he was inspired by this movie. Anyway, there's also an underground society, which is an idealized 1950s Americana dystopia. The story is about a boy and his dog surviving on the surface world. The dog in this case is a mutant dog with telepathy, and his human companion is his best and only friend. When the boy meets a girl from the underground dystopia, the promise of sex leads him to be strapped down and milked for semen, not quite what he expected. The girl helps him escape, but she has ulterior motives. Ultimately, the boy has to choose between the girl and the dog. The last movie on this list is Fantastic Planet, an animated sci-fi movie from 1973 with a whopping 91% on the tomatometer and an 87% audience rating. This is a French experimental film with really interesting, almost surreal artwork, but the animation itself is not cutting edge. It's actually kind of primitive even for the time. It has this slightly jerky stop motion look, and the backgrounds are often just stills, but the story is pretty fantastic, about an advanced race of giant blue spiritual aliens who have brought humans to their planet to keep as pets. Some humans have escaped into the wilds and are treated as pests because the aliens occasionally have to exterminate them. One of the human pets is able to use a teaching device meant for the alien children and learns to use their advanced technology. He escapes into the wilds and leads a revolution against the blue alien masters. Okay, when I first saw this at a very young age, I was scandalized that a cartoon would show breasts and sex. Well, the sex was weird alien sex, but it's also another one of those movies that sticks with you long after you watch it. So there are 10 lesser-known science fiction movies from the 1970s. Have you seen any of these movies? Did you like them or hate them? Would you have replaced them with some other movie? Let me know down in the comments, and while you're there, please like this video and subscribe to my channel. Also, let me know if there are other decades you are interested in concerning science fiction movies, the 50s, 60s, 80s. Until we meet again, may all the movies you watch be blessed.